Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we are going to be talking about the relationship between Wicca and Thelema. This is a relationship that sometimes gets overblown. I think some people want to make more of this relationship than what it actually is. But it is a significant relationship, it is historically important, and it is worth our time to talk about and to sort of tease apart how these two religions are similar, how one was influenced by the other, and also the ways in which they diverge. For those who are unfamiliar, Thelema is a magical religion that was started by Aleister Crowley. The central text of Thelema is the Book of the Law, which was revealed to Crowley in 1904 by a spirit named Aiwass. There's a whole long, complicated story about Crowley being on a trip to Egypt, and his wife went into trance, and then he had all kinds of things happen. Anyways, but so Thelema is the magical religion that Crowley started as a result of the revelation of the Book of the Law. And there are sort of a number of religious and magical rituals associated with Thelema. The central ritual of Thelema is the Gnostic Mass, which is sort of the public ritual that's performed by OTO chapters all around the world. It's really beautiful, powerful, wonderful ritual. Wicca, on the other hand, is the neo-pagan witchcraft religion that was introduced to the world by Gerald Gardner, starting with the repeal of the Witchcraft Act in 1951. Gardner claimed to have been initiated in 1939 into a surviving coven of witches who were practicing a pre-Christian initiatory mystery religion, focused on two primary deities, a mother goddess and a horned god. We know that regardless of what Gardner may or may not have been initiated into, regardless of what may have been passed to him, we know that Gardner took the materials that were given to him and embellished them a great deal with materials that were available from other published sources. He was trying to sort of revive and preserve what he saw as a fragmentary survival of ancient paganism. And he did that by sort of cobbling together available sources on witchcraft, magic, paganism, and sort of polytheistic religion more broadly. And one of the sources that strongly influenced Gardner was the published work of Aleister Crowley. So, people like to say that Gerald Gardner was a Thelemite and that he imported Thelema into Wicca. And that's not really true. There's no evidence to suggest that Gardner ever practiced Thelema, or even that he ever participated in any Thelemic ritual. We know that Gerald Gardner met Aleister Crowley on May 1st, 1947. There's a record of it in Crowley's diaries. And he met Crowley a couple times after that. Crowley gave Gardner a charter that would give him the right to start his own OTO lodge if he so chose. But Gardner never actually went and founded a lodge. The charter that Crowley gave to Gardner was one that would have been given to him because Gardner had achieved the degree of Master Mason in Freemasonry. The OTO at the time sort of transferred over degrees. So if you had reached a certain level in Masonry, you were considered of an equivalent degree in the OTO. So Crowley gave Gardner an OTO charter based on Gardner's Master Mason degree. But it's unlikely that Crowley ever put Gardner through any kind of Thelemic initiation, and it's unlikely that Gardner ever actually practiced any Thelemic ritual. We have no evidence to suggest that he was ever a Thelemite. We do have record in his published works and in his private notebooks that suggests he was familiar with a certain body of Thelemic work, but all of it is the work that was sort of very publicly available. We know that Gardner had read the Gnostic Mass. We have evidence that suggests that he read Book 4, Magic. Beyond that, there's no real indication that he was actually all that familiar with Thelema. He had a cursory surface-level knowledge based on certain of Crowley's published works, but there's no indication that he had any kind of an in-depth study or practice with Thelemic concepts, with Thelemic ritual, or Thelemic magic. We do know that Gardner was at least superficially familiar with Kabbalah. There are notes in some of his works that say he's familiar with Kabbalah, and that he, understands Kabbalistic magic, but he considers Wiccan magic somewhat different, largely in that the way Gardner conceived of magic, Wiccan magic relied on direct sympathetic magic rather than the conjuring and evocation of spirits. The way that particularly sort of grimoire magic had been co-opted by occult secret societies like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, or like the kinds of grimoire magic that were adopted by Aleister Crowley. So we know that Gardner had a certain amount of familiarity with Kabbalah, a certain amount of familiarity with published works of Thelema, and that those things did have a certain influence on the witch cult that he sort of rebuilt and introduced into the world. This is particularly of interest to me because of my book, Kabbalah for Wiccans, which, hey, if you're new to the channel and you don't know this, I wrote a book. It's called Kabbalah for Wiccans. You should go read it. It's great. This book talks a little bit about sort of the ways that Kabbalah fits into Wiccan practice. Wicca is, generally speaking, not terribly overtly Kabbalistic. I don't think you need to know Kabbalah to be good at Wicca or to get a lot out of Wicca. But we know that Gardner, Dorian Valiente, and a couple of other really important, influential figures in the founding of Wicca did know Kabbalah, were influenced by it, were thinking about it, and there's sort of a subtle way that that works its way into Wicca, and the two systems actually complement each other quite well. So, in case you're curious, here's a little plug for my book. Go buy it, go read it, then leave a 5-star review on Amazon. Amazon reviews, sincerely, Amazon reviews are one of the best ways to support an author, so even if it's not a 5-star review, if you do read the book, please do leave an Amazon review, because it really helps. It feeds Amazon's algorithm, and it helps other people find the book. Enough about that. So that's what we know about the relationship between Gardner and Crowley, and about sort of the amount of Thelema that Gardner had been exposed to. And it's really not much. There's not a lot of Thelema getting into the Wicca. And what does get in is very superficial. But, people like to say, particularly certain Thelemites really like to say that Wicca is just watered down Thelema. And conversely, certain Wiccans like to say, mostly with their tongue-in-cheek, but certain Wiccans like to say that Thelema is just unnecessarily complicated Wicca. There is a certain kind of affinity between the two practices. They're both magical religions. They both focus in part on the partnership of two principal deities, a goddess and a god, who are understood in gendered-ish terms. So in Wicca, you have the mother goddess and the horned god of, death and sex and all the fun stuff. And in Thelema, you have sort of two primary groupings of deities. You have Nuit, Hadit, and Rahor Huit, who are the deities mentioned in the Book of the Law. Nuit is sort of the original primordial mother goddess. She's associated with Isis. She's also this sort of cosmic transcendent figure. Hadit, in contrast, is a god of sort of death and resurrection. He's associated with Osiris, in contrast to Nuit as Isis. So you can see sort of a parallel there. And then you have sort of a second tier of deities with Babylon and the Great Beast. Babylon, being associated with the Kabbalistic concept of Bina, is the mother of abominations. She's sort of the great principle of form that shapes the world. And Therion, the great beast, is the principle of chaos, the principle of force and change that animates Babylon. And there's all kinds of Kabbalistic stuff going on in that relationship. It's complicated and fascinating and very, very magical. And also tangled up with a lot of Victorian sexual politics. But, and in that respect, there are certainly resonances and affinities between the gods of Wicca and the god forms of Thelema, right? There are ways in which the Wiccan goddess is very similar to Nuit or Babylon. There are ways in which the Wiccan god has certain qualities very much in common with Hadit or Rahor Huit, yes, but with the Great Beast. There are things that are alike. You talk to people who have attended both Wiccan and Thelemic ritual, particularly the Gnostic Mass, and they will say that the energy feels very similar between the two, right? There is something that feels the same about being in a Gnostic Mass or being in a Wiccan circle. There's a certain sense in which we're doing a similar sort of thing. So there absolutely is a relationship there. There is an affinity there. There is a way in which we're kind of speaking the same language. At the same time, it's important to note, A, that Wicca was influenced by a lot of things other than Thelema. And this is, I think, a really, really important point. Thelema is an influence on Wicca, yes, but also we have sort of this romantic revival of paganism going on. We have Freemasonry and sort of which also influenced the OTO, but really Gardner was drawing much more directly from Freemasonry as he had experienced it, rather than Freemasonry as filtered through Thelema. And then we have ideas of paganism that come to us through figures like Margaret Murray with the witch cult in Western Europe, James Fraser with the Golden Bough, and so on. So there's a lot else going on that comes in and influences Wicca and shapes Wicca in ways that are independent of Thelema. And I think when we talk about the relationship between Wicca and Thelema, it's really important for us to highlight that there are these other things going on as well. Francis King, in one of his books, and I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, sort of introduced out of nowhere and with no evidence the claim that Gerald Gardner had hired Aleister Crowley to write the Book of Shadows. There's no evidence for that. I don't think that Crowley would have undertaken such a project. I also think that if Crowley had undertaken such a project, without being able to divulge anything particular about the contents of the Book of Shadows, I think he would have been very different in the way that he would have approached a project like that. There's nothing in the Book of Shadows to me that looks like, oh yes, Crowley sat down and decided to write this thing. But there's certainly been a pervasive idea. Sorry, I have sunlight coming in through the window and hitting me. Hopefully it's getting my good angles. There's certainly been a pervasive idea that Wicca is just kind of a discount Thelema, knockoff Thelema, or just copied from Thelema. And, there's a lot else going on in Wicca that's not Thelemic, but secondly, this is something that I think really doesn't get enough airtime when people talk about the relationship between Wicca and Thelema. And that's the concept of true will. So true will is the central tenet of Thelema as a religion. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Discovering and then attaining your true will is what Thelema is all about. You achieve knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel in order to cross the abyss so that your true will can be achieved. And even if you don't do all the rest of the stuff that's in Thelema, even if you never attend a Gnostic Mass, even if you never do Liber Resh, even if you never, whatever, even if you never do the Star Ruby or the Star Sapphire, any of it, if you adhere to the concept of true will, and you follow as a religious precept the idea that love is the law, love under will, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, if true will is what motivates your religious and magical practice, then you can call yourself a Thelemite, because that's what Thelema really is when you boil it all down. And that's super, super important. It's like Tawheed in Islam. So Tawheed is the claim that La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God. It's the central tenet of the Islamic faith. And there are several other things going on in Islam, right? You need to make 5 prayers a day with additional prayers on Fridays. You're supposed to fast during Ramadan. You're supposed to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca. And all of those things are true, but at the end of the day, the only thing that's needed in order to count as Muslim is Tawheed. As long as you affirm that there is no God but God and that Muhammad is the prophet of God, you count as Muslim, even if you don't do the rest. You might not be a very good Muslim, but you count as Muslim. There's a similar thing in Thelema, right? True will, the doctrine of true will, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, is really what Thelema boils down to. And even if you don't do all the other extra ritual trappings, if you adhere to that, you get to call yourself a Thelemite. Now, importantly, there is no such thing as true will in Wicca. The concept just isn't present in Wicca. There are individual Wiccans who, like the concept, have adopted it for themselves. Sometimes they sort of double dip and they are simultaneously Wiccan and Thelemite. But the Wiccan liturgy, Wiccan ritual, Wiccan teaching and theology, there is nothing beginning to resemble true will anywhere in Wicca, or at least in sort of orthodox Gardnerian Wicca, right? Like Wicca as Gardner first introduced it. It's just absent. There's nothing like that, you know? As a general precept, don't be a dick, right? Try to be a good person. A lot of Wiccans, I personally don't. It's not really a thing in Gardnerian Wicca, but there are a lot of Wiccans who adhere to the Wiccan Rede, and at harm none, do what thou wilt. That's not really the same thing as true will. It's really not. And moreover, like I say, it's not central to Gardnerian Wicca. The Wiccan Rede is not a part of Gardnerian Wicca. Neither is the threefold law. And so this thing that is so crucial to Thelema, to the heart of what Thelema is absent from Wicca. And I think that's worth taking the time to really sit with, because it's a major point of divergence between these two religions. There are superficial similarities in ritual structure or in the nature of the gods or things like that, that show, you know, a relationship and an influence of Thelema on Wicca. But when you get down right to the heart of it, Wicca lacks the thing that makes Thelema Thelema. There is no doctrine of true will. Doctrine is a word that Thelemites don't like. There is no concept of true will in Wicca. There is no attaining your true will. And that's not to say that Wiccans don't, you know, pursue a project of self-improvement or try to do things that really, you know, make them passionate or whatever, but the language of true will, the idea of true will as a sacred thing, is just absent from the religion. And I think that really gets overlooked, doesn't get talked about enough, and to me is sort of the most fundamental thing, aside from all the other sort of little superficial, shiny differences. That's the most fundamental thing that makes Wicca different from Thelema, is the presence or absence of true will. So that's about all I have to say for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Buy my book. And I will see you probably in 2022.